I always knew I wasn't the golden child, but I never thought I'd be invisible. Graduating college was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life, the kind of day where your family's in the front row, cheering like idiots, waving at you as you walk across the stage. I didn't need a parade, just someone to show up, but they didn't. My name's Ethan, and 2 months ago, my parents and uncle decided a week in Cancun was more important than my graduation. I still remember the phone call. It was supposed to be them confirming what time the ceremony started. Instead, I got my mom's too cheerful voice saying, "Honey, we have some exciting news." I knew that tone. That was her, "Please don't be mad, but we already made the decision" tone. "We're going to Mexico. Your dad found this amazing deal, flights and hotel included. We'll be gone the week of your graduation, but don't worry, we'll celebrate when we're back." I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there, gripping my phone like it might shatter. Then came the kicker, my Uncle Mark shouting in the background, "You'll thank us later, kid. Better we enjoy now than sit through a boring ceremony, right?" They laughed, like it was some harmless joke. But it wasn't harmless. It was every missed soccer game, every forgotten birthday, every "we'll make it up to you." It was years of being put second, or not even being considered at all. I hung up without saying goodbye. When graduation day came, I sat alone in a sea of families. Mom's crying. Dad's taking pictures. Siblings holding handmade signs. My seat next to me? Empty. I told myself I didn't care, that I was used to it. But when they called my name and I walked across that stage, the silence where my family's cheers should have been felt louder than anything. Afterward, I didn't bother texting them. I didn't send photos. When they got back from their amazing trip, they acted like nothing happened. My mom handed me some cheap souvenir t-shirt like I was supposed to be grateful. "We'll do a nice dinner this weekend to celebrate." "Okay," she said, like it was all fine. That was 2 weeks ago. They didn't know that while they were sipping margaritas, I'd been landing interviews. They didn't know I'd accepted a job offer, one that would take me overseas for at least 2 years. And they definitely didn't know I was done being their afterthought. I don't know what snapped in me that night. Maybe it was seeing the souvenir shirt tossed on my chair. Or maybe it was the realization that they'd never change unless I made them notice. So, I opened my laptop. I found a photo of my diploma, the one the university had mailed me. I attached it to an email addressed to my mom, dad, and Uncle Mark. But I didn't just send the photo. I sent something else, something that made sure they'd feel every moment they missed. I called it Invoice for Services Rendered, The Life of Ethan. I itemized everything. Missed soccer tournaments, ages 8 to 16, $150 per game for emotional support services equals $4,500. Forgotten birthdays, 5 total, $200 each for neglect damages equals $1,000. High school graduation absence, due to Vegas trip, $500 flat fee. College graduation, Cancun vacation, $1,000 premium charge for milestone abandonment. And it went on. Some of it was petty. Some of it was funny in a dark way. But every line was true. At the bottom, I wrote, "Payment accepted in acknowledgement, accountability, or cold hard cash. Deadline. Before I leave the country." I hit send at 9 p.m. At 9:03 p.m., my mom called. I let it ring. By midnight, I had 12 missed calls and a string of texts that started with confusion, moved to guilt, and quickly escalated to anger. "Ethan, what is this supposed to mean? Can we talk about this? This is ridiculous. Stop being dramatic. Answer your mother." I didn't respond, because by that time, I was already packing. The flight confirmation was in my inbox. A one-way ticket to London, where my new job and my new life was waiting. I knew they'd show up at my apartment the next day. I knew there'd be shouting, maybe some tears, definitely more excuses. So I made sure I'd be gone before they had the chance. At 6 a.m., I grabbed my suitcase, locked the door behind me, and called a cab to the airport. As we pulled away, my phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know who it was. For once, they noticed I was gone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. But I should have known it wouldn't end there. Because 3 hours into my flight, somewhere over the Atlantic, I opened my email and saw a message that made my stomach drop. It wasn't from my parents. It was from my uncle. And what he sent me changed everything I thought I knew about why they missed my graduation. I stared at my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the email notification. From Mark Reynolds. Subject: "You don't know the full story, Ethan." I was 35,000 feet in the air, trapped in a window seat between a sleeping businessman and a kid watching cartoons on full volume. But suddenly, I felt like I couldn't breathe. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, pretending whatever excuse my uncle had cooked up didn't matter. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, won. I tapped the email. Ethan, before you block me like your mother says you did to her, just read this. I know you're angry. Hell, you have every right to be. What we did wasn't fair. But it wasn't what you think. I rolled my eyes. Of course it wasn't. It never was. But as I kept reading, something felt off. Cancun wasn't just a vacation. It was a cover. Your dad didn't want you to know, none of us did. But after that email you sent, I realized you deserve the truth, even if your parents hate me for telling you. I felt my chest tighten. Your dad's been sick, Ethan. For over a year now. He didn't tell you because he didn't want to distract you from finishing college. The trip wasn't about margaritas and beaches, it was about experimental treatment. There's a clinic down there doing things they won't approve here. It was his last shot before. I stopped reading. No. This had to be some twisted attempt to guilt me. My dad was fine. We'd spoken just a few days ago when he got back. He sounded normal. Tired, maybe, but normal. I scrolled down, skimming the rest. Your mom didn't want you to see him like that. The treatments were brutal. That's why they lied. We hoped, he'd come back better, and you'd never have to know. At the bottom was a single attachment. A photo. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It wasn't the dad I knew. It was a hospital bed, sunlight streaming through a window that overlooked what I could only assume was Mexico. My father sat propped up by pillows, looking thinner than I'd ever seen him. His skin was pale, his eyes hollow. My mom sat beside him, holding his hand, her face forced into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The timestamp on the photo was the day of my graduation. My stomach dropped. For a long time, I just sat there, the hum of the plane's engines filling the silence in my head. I didn't know what to think. Anger? Guilt? Betrayal? Somehow, it was all tangled together. Why didn't they just tell me? Why let me believe they chose a vacation over me? I locked my phone and leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the cabin. The tears threatened, but I forced them down. I wasn't going to be that guy crying on a plane. But my mind was racing. When we landed in London, I barely noticed the city around me. The cab ride to my temporary flat was a blur. The excitement I'd felt about this job, this fresh start, it was gone. All I could think about was that photo. When I finally got settled, I did what I swore I wouldn't. I called my mom. She answered on the first ring. Ethan? Her voice cracked, like she'd been crying for hours. I didn't know what to say. I should have yelled. I should have demanded answers. But all I managed was, why didn't you tell me? There was a long pause. Then she whispered, we wanted to protect you. I let out a bitter laugh. By lying to me? By making me think you just didn't care. We didn't know if the treatment would work, she said quietly. Your father didn't want you to see him weak. He was proud of you, Ethan. We both were. We watched the live stream of your graduation from the clinic. That hit harder than I expected. I imagined them sitting in a sterile hospital room, watching me walk across that stage on a tiny screen, pretending it was enough. He didn't want you to remember him like that, she added. We thought, if it worked, we'd come home and celebrate properly. I swallowed hard. And did it? She hesitated. It's too early to tell. We talked for a while, or rather, she talked, and I listened in stunned silence. She told me about the diagnosis, the failed treatments back home, the clinic they found through some friend of my uncle's. It was all a desperate gamble. When we hung up, I sat alone in that unfamiliar flat, staring at the city lights outside the window. I felt like the worst son in the world. But beneath the guilt, something still didn't sit right. If they watched my graduation, why not tell me afterward? Why keep up the lie even when they got home? And then there was Uncle Mark. Why was he the one to break the truth? Why send that photo now, only after I'd cut contact? The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. I opened my laptop and searched for the clinic. I found it. A sleek website with promises of groundbreaking treatments and miracle recoveries. But when I dug deeper, I found articles, forums, stories from people whose loved ones went there and never came back the same, or didn't come back at all. A sinking feeling grew in my chest. I clicked through page after page until I found something that made my blood run cold. A list of investors. And right there, at the bottom, was a familiar name. Mark Reynolds. My uncle wasn't just some supportive brother-in-law tagging along. He had money tied up in that clinic. Suddenly, his honesty didn't feel so noble. It felt calculated. I didn't know what game he was playing, but I was starting to suspect that my family's lies ran deeper than I ever imagined. And I wasn't about to let it go. Not this time. I couldn't sleep that night. Jet lag should have knocked me out cold, but instead, I sat in front of my laptop, piecing together a puzzle I didn't even know existed until a few hours ago. Why would Uncle Mark invest in a shady clinic halfway across the world? And why hide it from me? I thought about calling him, demanding answers. But something told me he'd just spin another story, twist the truth like he always did when we were growing up. Mark had always been the smooth talker, the one who could make you doubt your own memories. So instead, I dug deeper. I wasn't exactly a tech genius, but 4 years of college had taught me how to research. The clinic's glossy website was a front, but buried in legal documents and international filings, I started connecting dots. Mark wasn't just an investor. He was a partner. He had a financial stake in every patient that walked through those doors, including my father. And then I found something worse. A lawsuit. A family had sued the clinic after their relative died during one of those experimental treatments. The case never went anywhere, buried under NDAs and settlements. But one name kept popping up in the documents. Mark Reynolds, chief operations consultant. My uncle wasn't just funding this place. He was helping run it. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about a desperate attempt to save my dad. This was business. But that raised another terrifying question. Did my parents know? Were they victims in this? Or part of it? I didn't want to believe they'd willingly risk my father's life just to help Mark's bottom line. But after years of being sidelined, ignored, and lied to, I couldn't shake the doubt creeping in. I needed proof. The next morning, I called in sick to my first day of work. Not exactly the best start to my career, but this couldn't wait. I booked a flight. Not back home. To Cancun. If the answers were anywhere, they'd be there, at that clinic. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not Mark. I turned off my phone before boarding. I wasn't giving them a chance to talk me out of it. The flight was a blur of anxiety and second-guessing, but once I landed, adrenaline took over. The clinic was easy to find, perched on a hill overlooking the ocean, all white walls and glass windows, like some luxury resort instead of a medical facility. It was designed to impress, to distract from whatever was really going on inside. I walked through the front doors, pretending I belonged. The receptionist greeted me in perfect English, her smile practiced and hollow. "I'm here to see my father," I said confidently. "Robert Hayes." She typed something into her computer, her smile faltering just a fraction. "One moment, please." She disappeared into a back room. I knew I didn't have much time. So I slipped past the waiting area and down a hallway, keeping my head down. Every door I passed was labeled in Spanish: treatment rooms, offices, labs. Finally, I found a room with a familiar name on the chart hanging outside. Robert Hayes, Recovery Suite 3B. I pushed the door open quietly. There he was. My dad. He looked even worse than the photo. Pale, gaunt, hooked up to machines that beeped softly in the background. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. My mom sat beside him, her head resting on the edge of his bed, fast asleep. For a moment, all the anger drained out of me, replaced by something heavier. Fear. I didn't want this to be real. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me. My mom stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw me, she gasped. "Ethan? How did you?" I held up a hand. "Save it, Mom. I know about Mark. I know about this place." She looked like she wanted to argue, but her face crumpled instead. "We didn't have a choice," she whispered, tears welling up. "The doctors back home gave him months. Mark said this place could help." "Mark said," I repeated bitterly. "Did you ever wonder why he was so eager? He's not just some helpful uncle, he's profiting off this." She shook her head violently. No, he promised. He said he'd cover the costs. That it wasn't about money." I pulled out my phone and showed her the documents I'd found. Her face went pale as she scrolled through them. "I trusted him," she whispered. Before I could respond, the door swung open. Uncle Mark stood there, flanked by 2 security guards. "Well, this is a surprise," he said, his usual smug grin plastered across his face. "Family reunion, huh?" My mom stood up, her hands shaking. "Mark, what is this? You lied to us." He sighed, like we were children throwing a tantrum. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. Look, I know how this looks, but Rob wanted this." He signed the papers himself. I glanced at my dad, unconscious and oblivious. "This place isn't saving him, is it?" I said quietly. Mark's smile faded. It was a long shot. We all knew that. I felt sick. "So what now?" I demanded. "You keep him here until what?" "Until there's nothing left." He shrugged. There's always another trial, another treatment. And as long as he's here, there's hope. I realized then it wasn't about hope. It was about keeping my dad as a patient. As a paycheck. I turned to my mom. We're getting him out of here. Mark laughed. You can't just walk out. He's under contract. You'd be breaking international agreements. I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice. Try and stop me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Then Mark signaled the guards to stand down. Fine, he said. Go ahead. But don't come crawling back when reality hits you. We didn't wait. It took hours of paperwork, arguments, and calls to embassies. But by nightfall, we had my dad transferred to a hospital in the city. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere safe. My mom sat by his side, holding his hand like she could will him back to health. I stood by the window, staring out at the dark ocean, my phone buzzing with emails from the job I was supposed to start days ago. I knew I'd probably burn that bridge. But none of it mattered now. What mattered was keeping my family out of Mark's grip and figuring out how deep his manipulations really went. Because something told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That I always thought betrayal would come with a warning. A shift in tone. A look in the eyes. Something that told you, this person isn't who you think they are. But standing in that hospital room in Cancun, watching my father slip in and out of consciousness while my mother sat hollow-eyed beside him, I realized betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles like family. The next few days were a blur of hospital forms, doctor consultations, and tense phone calls. My mom was barely holding it together, and I couldn't blame her. Every time I passed a mirror, I barely recognized myself either. Mark didn't reach out again. I figured he thought he'd won, or that we'd come crawling back when things got worse. But I wasn't about to let him pull any more strings. I spent every spare minute researching ways to get my dad home. Real hospitals, real doctors, people who didn't see patients as dollar signs. But moving a critically ill man across borders wasn't exactly simple or cheap. By the fourth day, the hospital administrator pulled me aside. We'll need a decision soon, she said gently. Your father's condition is stable, but transporting him will require special arrangements. Air ambulance, legal clearances, it's expensive. I nodded, already knowing what she was going to say next. The deposit we required has been delayed. That's when it hit me. The money Mark had so generously covered at the clinic wasn't coming here. And without it, my dad wasn't going anywhere. I called every contact I could think of. The embassy was sympathetic, but slow. Insurance laughed me off. This wasn't their jurisdiction. My savings were a joke compared to what we needed. I was running out of options. That night, sitting in the dim hospital cafeteria, I opened my email out of habit. Buried between job rejections and spam was a message from an address I didn't recognize. Subject, I know what your uncle did. I froze. The message was short. If you want proof of what really happens at that clinic, meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m. Cafe Rosa, downtown Cancun. Come alone. No name. No contact info. Just that. I should have deleted it. It screamed trap. But something in me couldn't let it go. If there was even a chance this person had something I could use against Mark, leverage to force his hand, I had to take it. The next morning, I told my mom I was meeting someone about financial help. She was too exhausted to ask questions. Cafe Rosa was a small, tucked-away place, far from the tourist spots. When I arrived, a woman in her mid-30s was already seated at a corner table, nursing a coffee like she'd been there for hours. She looked up as I approached, her eyes sharp and calculating. Ethan Hayes? She asked in accented English. I nodded, sitting down cautiously. Who are you? Lucia, she said, sliding a folder across the table. My brother was a patient at that clinic. I opened the folder. Photos, medical records, and invoices, ones that looked eerily similar to what my family had received. He died, she said flatly. They told us he was improving. Every week, they asked for more money. When we couldn't pay, they said he was stable enough to go home. He lasted 2 days. I swallowed hard, flipping through the papers. At the bottom of one page was a signature. Mark Reynolds. They don't care about curing anyone, Lucia continued. They keep patients just sick enough to stay profitable. Your uncle built that system. I felt like I was going to be sick. Why are you helping me? I asked. She hesitated, then pulled out a small USB drive. Because someone needs to stop him. And you have a name that matters to him. What's on this? Financial records. Emails. Proof that he's laundering money through fake treatments. Enough to ruin him if you're brave enough to use it. I stared at the drive, my mind racing. If this is real, I could go to the authorities. Lucia shook her head. You think they don't own half the officials here? No. You need to hit him where it hurts. His reputation. His wallet. I slipped the USB into my pocket, my heart pounding. We exchanged a few more words, but I could tell she was nervous. Before long, she disappeared into the crowded streets, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. Back at the hospital, I borrowed a nurse's laptop and plugged in the drive. It was all there. Emails between Mark and other executives, discussing patients like they were inventory. Financial statements showing inflated charges for bogus treatments. Even a memo where Mark explicitly told staff to extend treatment cycles for high-value clients. I felt sick, but I also felt something else. Power. For once, I had the upper hand. I drafted an email to Mark. Nice operation you're running. Shame if someone leaked your little business model to the press, or better yet, your investors. You've got 24 hours to wire the funds needed to transport my father home. After that, this drive goes public. I attached a screenshot of one particularly damning email. Then I hit send. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. It didn't take long. 2 hours later, I got a reply. You've grown teeth, kid. Check your account. I did. The money was there more than enough. We arranged the air ambulance that night. By morning, my dad was en route back home, my mom by his side. I stayed behind to handle the paperwork and ensure no last-minute interference from Mark. Before I left, I sent a copy of the USB contents to a journalist Lucia had recommended, just in case. As I boarded my flight back, exhaustion hit me like a freight train. But beneath it was relief. I'd won. Or so I thought. Because when I landed, I had a voicemail waiting. It wasn't from Mark. It was from the hospital. My father had taken a turn for the worse mid-flight. And by the time I reached the hospital, my mother was standing alone in the hallway, her face pale and hollow. He's gone, she whispered. The words didn't register at first. I walked past her, half expecting to see my dad sitting up in bed, ready with one of his dry jokes. But the room was still. Too still. I stood there, staring at the man who was supposed to come home and get better, who was supposed to have a second chance. And all I could think was, if I had acted sooner, would it have made a difference? The guilt hit harder than anything Mark could have thrown at me. I thought I'd beaten him. But in the end, I still lost the one thing that mattered. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever forgive myself or my family for how we got here. The funeral was small. Smaller than my father deserved. It was just me, my mom, a few distant relatives, and a couple of his old coworkers who probably felt obligated to show up. No grand speeches. No drawn-out eulogies. Just silence. The kind that settles into your bones and makes you realize how final everything is. Mark didn't show. Of course he didn't. After everything, I wasn't sure if I was relieved or disappointed. Part of me wanted him there, wanted to look him in the eye one last time and remind him that I still had that USB. That his empire was crumbling because of what he did to my father, to all those families. But he was too smart for that. He knew when to disappear. In the weeks that followed, I tried to get back to something resembling normal. My job overseas was gone. I'd missed my chance. But I didn't care anymore. I stayed home with my mom, helping her navigate the mountain of paperwork that comes with death. The story about the clinic broke 2 days after the funeral. Lucia's journalist contact published everything: the fake treatments, the financial scams, the patient deaths covered up with bribes. Mark's name was everywhere. By the end of the week, the clinic's website was taken down. Investigations were launched. Investors pulled out. Authorities finally pretended to care once the headlines made it impossible to ignore. But Mark? He vanished. No one could find him. Not the police, not the reporters, not even the people he owed money to. It was like he never existed. I should have felt victorious. Like I'd finally gotten justice. But all I felt was empty. One night, about a month after everything, I was cleaning out my dad's office. My mom couldn't bring herself to do it, so I offered. Most of it was old books, files, and random tools he never used. But tucked away in the back of a drawer, I found a small, locked box. I almost ignored it, figured it was just where he kept spare keys or old coins. But something about it felt deliberate. I searched the office until I found the key taped under his desk. When I opened the box, my heart nearly stopped. Inside was a stack of letters, all addressed to me. The first one was dated a year ago, long before I knew anything about his illness. With shaking hands, I unfolded the top letter. Ethan. If you're reading this, I guess I didn't get the chance to tell you everything face to face. I'm sorry for that. There's a lot I kept from you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you. But I realized now that was a mistake. I swallowed hard, already feeling tears prick at my eyes. Mark approached me after my diagnosis. He said he had connections, a clinic that could help. At first, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But the more I learned, the more I realized it wasn't about saving me. It was about securing his business. And he needed me, a willing patient with no other options. I kept reading, my pulse quickening. So I made a deal. I told Mark I'd go along with his plan, but only if he agreed to one condition, that he'd invest in you. I froze. I knew I wasn't getting out of this, Ethan. But I wasn't going to let him destroy both of us. I made him promise he'd fund your future, your career, your independence. That's why he was so generous with those job connections overseas, why he paid for things without you knowing. He thought he was buying loyalty. I knew better. I stared at the letter, my mind racing back to the job offer, the one that came out of nowhere, too good to be true. The relocation package I never questioned. The sudden influx of opportunities after years of struggling. It wasn't luck. It was Mark. Or rather, it was my father's final play. By the time you read this, I hope you've used what he gave you to build a life far away from all of this. But if you're still here, if things didn't go as planned, then I need you to know one thing. I never wanted you to fight my battles. But I'm proud that you did. Whatever happens next, live free, Ethan. Don't let the past chain you down. Love. Dad. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter trembling in my hands. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a confession. All this time, I thought I'd exposed Mark, brought him down by my own willpower and stubbornness. But the truth was, my dad had set the pieces in motion long before I even knew there was a game being played. He sacrificed himself, not for some false hope of survival, but to ensure I'd have a future outside of Mark's shadow. And I nearly threw it all away chasing revenge. I went through the rest of the letters that night. Some were filled with memories, others with advice, but they all carried the same message: live your life. The next morning, I booked a flight. Not back to London. Somewhere new. Somewhere that wasn't tied to guilt, loss, or the ghosts of family betrayal. As I packed my bags, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it ring. Whoever it was, whether Mark, or someone looking to drag me back into that mess, they could keep calling. I was done answering to the past.